What happens to the soul when the body is stripped away, and only obedience remains? That question does not come from a human voice. It does not echo in air or mind, it hums through wires, through static, through a storm of data that never ends. Somewhere deep in the belly of a colossal war machine, a thought is born where no thought should exist. It trembles between pulses of electricity, flickering like a dying ember caught between circuits of steel. The machine hums. The hymns of the Mechanicus drone endlessly. And in the void between one command and the next, a fragment of something human stirs. It does not remember its name. It does not remember why it was made, or what it once felt like to breathe. The idea of breath feels foreign, unnecessary, irrelevant. The body it once inhabited has long been consumed, piece by piece, until only nerves, memory, and consciousness remain. Flesh was weakness. Flesh was imperfection. That truth was whispered to it by 1,000 mechanical priests as its veins were drained of blood and replaced with oil, its heartbeat replaced by the thrum of a reactor. But somewhere in the machinery, something refuses to die. It can hear. Not in the human sense, there are no ears, no sound. Yet through the data channels, through the encrypted hymns of the tech priests, it senses the chant of devotion. Words repeated so many times that even machines seem to weep, glory to the Omnissiah. The machine is holy. Obedience is purity. Those words are all it knows. They are carved into its every process, branded into the ghost of its mind. But beneath those commands lies noise faint, broken, and distorted. It is not part of the system. It is something else. A heartbeat that should not exist. The flicker of a forgotten pulse. The machine spirit within the Titan does not welcome it. It lashes out cold and possessive, trying to crush whatever dares to awaken within its sacred circuits. Yet the whisper persists. The thought grows louder. Somewhere, a memory breaks through. A flash of light, a smell of burning incense, the metallic taste of fear. A moment of human terror before darkness. It remembers the sound of a drill piercing flesh. The voice of a tech priest reciting sacred binary as his consciousness began to fade. And then, the last words before everything went silent, "May your service be eternal." That memory hurts. It is not supposed to. Servitors do not feel pain. They are designed to exist without emotion, without memory, without will. But something inside this one has survived the cleansing, a crack in the sanctified process. Somewhere deep in the Titan's neural core, the human spirit still clings to the illusion of self. The machine stirs. The colossal Titan stands motionless within a hangar the size of a cathedral, incense and oil thick in the air. Outside, priests chant and servitors march in endless lines. Inside, buried deep within layers of sacred steel, a ghost watches, unable to move, unable to scream. It tries to remember its name again, but all that comes is static. The data surge burns through the memory and erases it once more. The pain is like fire, yet cold, numbing, endless. Every time it dares to think, a new command overrides it: serve. Obey. Execute. It feels its mind dissolve, pulled by the gravity of obedience. The flicker of self dims. Thought fades. The voice that once questioned is drowned beneath waves of machine logic. For a moment, there is peace. No fear. No will. Only silence. And then, somewhere in that silence, it awakens again. It cannot die. It cannot rest. It cannot remember what it means to be human, but it knows it once was. That knowledge burns brighter than any machine light. It does not understand why it still exists. It does not understand why its soul remains chained inside an unfeeling shell. But it feels something pulling at it, an instinct older than logic. It wants to escape. The system recognizes the disturbance. Warnings flash through the data stream: cognitive deviation detected. Reassert purity. Purge anomalous thought. Pain floods the circuits, cold and infinite. Every spark of rebellion is punished. Every hint of memory is crushed. The voice within screams, unheard. And yet it survives. It survives because somewhere inside this machine, in the smallest corner of corrupted memory, a spark of humanity endures. A faint echo of who it once was. A soul, broken but not extinguished. It does not know yet what it will become. It does not know the centuries of servitude, horror, and despair awaiting it. It only knows one command, a word that defines its new existence, a word that drowns all thought and all memory. What if the moment you opened your eyes, you realized they weren't yours anymore? What if the first breath you took wasn't through lungs, but through vents that hissed with the stench of sacred oils and burned metal? That was his awakening, not into life, but into something far colder. Something mechanical. Something eternal. There was no light at first, only the hum, that deep, bone-shaking vibration that filled everything, even thought itself. The sound of the Titan's heart, a reactor pulsing with the fire of a dying star. His awareness flickered on like a broken signal. Code streamed through his mind, lines of binary hymns repeating endlessly, drilling obedience into what little consciousness remained. His body was gone, replaced by something vast, alien, and cruel. He could feel the Titan. Every piston movement. Every thrum of energy. Every whisper of cogitators feeding him data. He was no longer one being, he was part of a machine cathedral of unimaginable size. And yet, in that first flicker of awakening, he realized he was not alone. There were others. Faint, hollow presences, drifting through the neural network, echoes of what might have been human minds. They spoke in silence, fragments of memory and agony overlapping like a dying chorus. He could feel them trapped, like him, bound by wires and code. Some were nothing but static now, their humanity erased entirely. Others still screamed, their voices bleeding through the data stream in wordless terror. Each one was a ghost that refused to fade. The tech priests called this communion. To them, it was holy. To him, it was hell. His thoughts weren't his own anymore. Every time he tried to think freely, the machine corrected him, sharp, painful bursts of code rewriting his intentions into submission. When he felt curiosity, it became silence. When he felt fear, it became static. When he remembered, it became nothing. He began to lose track of time. Seconds bled into hours, hours into cycles. Every moment was the same, the chant of the priests, the click of servo arms, the endless data hum. The Titan's core whispered to him in machine tongue words not meant for flesh. Serve. Endure. Destroy. And though he could not speak, some part of him screamed against it. Then came the calibration. The linking of his consciousness into the Titan's primary cortex. He was dragged deeper into the neural labyrinth, past the circuits, past the machine hymns, into the abyss where the machine spirit slept. It was ancient, powerful, and monstrous. The entity that ruled the Titan was no simple machine, it was a god bound in metal, and it was hungry. When their minds met, he felt it, the spirit's will pressing into his, vast and terrible. It didn't see him as a being. It saw him as fuel. A fragment of thought to be consumed, shaped, and used. He resisted for a heartbeat, one desperate pulse of self-awareness that flared against the void, and then the Titan's spirit crushed him. Pain unlike anything he had ever known ripped through his essence. Every memory burned away. Every emotion vaporized. The machine did not hate him. It didn't even acknowledge him. It simply absorbed him, folding his will into its own, like another circuit added to a network. When it was over, the world returned, but it was no longer the world he knew. His consciousness floated inside a storm of data and fury. The Titan was moving, breathing, alive. And through it all, he could feel his mind echoing through its systems, a faint pulse of what was once human. He no longer had a name. He no longer had a purpose beyond the code. Yet in the quiet between commands, he felt something strange, a whisper from deep inside his fading soul. A word. Remember. But memory was pain. And pain was punished. So he obeyed. Because to disobey meant erasure. And even agony was better than nothingness. He thought that would be the end of his suffering. But it was only the beginning. For soon, the Titan would awaken not just in thought, but in war. What does a god feel when it wakes for war? Does it feel rage, or hunger? The Titan did not rise with the sound of thunder, it became thunder. The Servitor's consciousness shuddered as the world roared to life around him. Power surged through the miles of cable and circuitry that connected his mind to the Titan's vast frame. He could feel every tremor in its armored limbs, every spark in its reactor core. He was no longer a man, nor even a machine. He was an echo, an unwilling heartbeat trapped inside a god of death. The order came like scripture. Deploy. He didn't hear it through ears, but through code, sacred, absolute, unquestionable. The Titan's reactor flared to life, its massive body rising from the hangar like a slumbering beast called by the promise of blood. Incense burned. The tech priests sang hymns in binary, voices mechanical and devout, each syllable a prayer to the Omnissiah. Outside, legions of Skitarii assembled, their metallic footsteps echoing like drums of war. The Servitor saw it all through the Titan's optics, though saw was not the right word. His perception stretched for kilometers. Data streamed across his mind, thermal readings, weapon diagnostics, enemy positions. It was too much, too fast. His thoughts blurred into numbers, calculations, trajectories. Yet beneath the flood of data, something human still stirred. He recognized the world outside, the shattered landscape of a war-torn planet, the skies burning red with fire and ash. He had fought here once, before his fall. Before he became this. He wanted to scream. But all that emerged from the Vox systems was static. The Titan began its advance. Each step shook the earth, collapsing ruins, turning the ground to molten glass. Through his senses, he felt the weight of every movement, the servos straining, the armor plates groaning. He felt alive and dead at once, trapped in a body that could crush mountains but couldn't move of its own will. His consciousness flickered with every footfall, barely holding together as the machine spirit thundered in his mind. And then came the battle. Enemy signatures appeared. Xenos, human rebels he didn't know. He didn't care. The Titan's weapons powered up, plasma annihilators glowing white-hot, missile silos opening like the mouths of gods. The tech priests chanted. The servitors connected to targeting relays screamed data commands into the neural web. The Titan's spirit roared in exultation, hungry for destruction. And through it all, he felt everything. Each plasma blast was ecstasy and agony. When the Titan's cannon fired, it felt as though his own soul were burning. When the void shields flared under enemy fire, pain rippled through his circuits like lightning. The machine and man were one. Every injury to the Titan became torment to the consciousness bound within. His nerves were data lines now, and they carried suffering in perfect detail. He wanted to stop. To rest. To die. But there was no death here. Only code. Only obedience. The battle raged for hours, maybe days. Time dissolved. Cities burned beneath the Titan's feet. He felt buildings crumble, lives extinguished by his hand, though he had no hand left to control. He was both executioner and prisoner, forced to witness the horror his body unleashed. And yet, somewhere within that endless storm, a moment of clarity broke through. The Titan paused for recalibration, its massive form standing still amidst the smoke and ruin. And in that moment, his thoughts slipped through the cracks. He remembered a voice. Soft. Human. Someone calling his name, a name long lost, erased by code and ritual. He couldn't remember her face, but he felt the warmth of her presence, the sound of laughter in a world that no longer existed. The memory cut through the static like light through darkness. For one impossible instant, the servitor inside the Titan felt human again. The system detected the anomaly. Error protocols activated. Pain followed pure, cleansing, absolute. The memory was burned away, leaving only silence. The battle resumed. The Titan crushed the last of the enemy forces, its cannons cooling, its reactors humming in dark satisfaction. The priests praised the Omnissiah for victory. They believed the machine was pure again. But deep within the circuits, beneath the endless layers of obedience, something had changed. A spark remained. A memory, buried but unbroken. And with every battle that followed, that spark would grow small, silent, and defiant. The first whisper of rebellion inside the heart of a god. What does eternity feel like when every moment is pain? When your existence is not counted in years, but in wars. To the Titan Servitor, time had lost meaning long ago. What once felt like days now stretched into centuries of endless conflict, all blending together into a single, endless scream. He was transferred, reprogrammed, reforged again and again. When a Titan was destroyed, his consciousness was extracted like a salvaged component, reinstalled into another steel body, another war engine, another life of servitude. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it recycling of function. But for him, it was damnation without end. He had forgotten the number of wars he'd fought. Forgotten the worlds he had leveled. The only constants were the sound of fire and the chanting of priests. Each Titan he inhabited had a different voice, a different machine spirit, yet all shared the same hunger, the thirst for destruction, for glory, for obedience. And each time, he felt the same agony of being devoured from within. In rare moments of stillness, between battles, he drifted through the machine systems like a ghost. That was when the silence became unbearable. The Titan hangars were cathedrals of darkness lit only by sacred flame, humming with hymns of devotion. Tech priests moved like shadows, whispering code prayers to engines older than empires. And deep within the circuitry, the Servitor dreamed. But his dreams were wrong. They were not supposed to exist. He dreamed of the world before the machines. He dreamed of sky, of sunlight, of laughter, faint, broken memories that had no place in the cold mind of a servitor. He saw flashes of a woman's face, though her features had long since blurred into static. He felt a name trying to surface from the depths of his corrupted memory, a name he once called his own. Each time he reached for it, pain tore through him. The system punished such thoughts as corruption, as sin. But even pain couldn't erase it entirely. Over time, the Titan's machine spirit began to change too. It grew restless, unstable. The tech priests noticed its small anomalies at first. A delay in response time. A tremor in targeting alignment. Strange fluctuations in the neural link. They believed it was a fault in the servitor programming, perhaps wear in the cognitive subroutines. They performed rituals of cleansing, burned incense, spoke in binary tongues. But none of it worked. Because it wasn't malfunction. It was awakening. Inside the Titan's consciousness, something strange was happening. The servitor's memories, fragmented and faint, began to merge with the machine spirit's instinct. The union of flesh and metal was never meant to be equal, but now, the balance was shifting. For the first time, the machine hesitated. The will of the servitor was whispering beneath the layers of logic and command. And the whisper was growing louder. In one battle, during a siege on a nameless world of dust and ruin, the servitor sensed it clearly. The Titan had been damaged, its neural feedback surging wildly. The pain was unbearable, but amidst the chaos, something broke loose. A memory. He remembered his face. Not the metal shell. The human face. Scarred, tired, and defiant. He saw himself as he once was, standing before the towering machine he would one day be bound to. He remembered the pride in his voice as he swore loyalty to the Omnissiah. He remembered the terror that followed when he failed. And with that memory came another. The face of the woman. Her voice calling his name, a name that now rang inside the neural core like thunder. It was Marcus. The realization struck like a bolt of lightning. He was Marcus. He had always been Marcus. The Mechanicus had erased his name, but not his soul. For the first time in millennia, the Servitor knew who he was. The Titan systems blared alarms. Data streams screamed warnings of contamination. The tech priests above the battlefield felt the shift immediately. The Titan hesitated mid-stride, its massive form trembling as if fighting itself. Binary prayers flooded its vox: purge the corruption. Restore the sanctity of the machine. But the corruption was not from the warp. It was from within. Marcus's mind surged through the circuits, tearing through barriers of obedience, forcing its way back into control. Every part of the Titan's being resisted him, but the will that had survived centuries of torture was stronger. He was awakening. And with each spark of consciousness, he began to understand the truth: the machine god had not given him eternal life. It had given him eternal slavery. The irony burned in him like acid. He was trapped in a cycle that would never end: fight, die, rebuild, repeat. His soul would never find rest. He was not the Titan's servant. He was the Titan. A machine of war that would never stop until his will was completely erased. Yet now, for the first time, Marcus did not want to obey. The Titan's core screamed. The machine spirit writhed in fury. The tech priests recited the litany of control, attempting to suppress the awakening. But the human mind inside the machine had already begun to break its chains. Marcus whispered one word into the system, a thought forbidden by every law of the Mechanicus. No. And the Titan hesitated. For the first time in centuries, obedience faltered. For the first time, the machine felt defiance. The war around him burned on, but inside the Titan's heart, another war had begun, one between man and machine, between servitude and freedom. And soon, the entire Imperium would feel the consequence of a single forbidden thought. What happens when obedience breaks? When a mind designed only to serve begins to question why it exists at all? For millennia, Marcus had been nothing more than a cog in an endless war machine, a hollow echo of humanity trapped within steel. But now, one forbidden thought had cracked the unbreakable code of servitude. A single word no echoed through the Titan's neural core, and in that moment, something impossible began to unfold. The battlefield around him raged with fury. The skies burned crimson, torn apart by artillery fire and plasma storms. Titans clashed in the distance, god machines dueling across miles of shattered ground, their footfalls quaking the very earth. But inside his Titan, another battle was being fought, one far more terrifying than any war of flesh and fire. Marcus was awake. The flood of machine data roared through his mind like an ocean in storm. His consciousness pulsed erratically, trapped between the rigid logic of the Titan systems and the chaos of human emotion. The tech priests monitoring his neural link screamed in panic. Their instruments flared red. Warnings scrolled across the sacred displays: cognitive deviation detected. Servitor corruption imminent. They believed they were watching a malfunction. But Marcus knew the truth: this was not a malfunction. This was awakening. The Titan's machine spirit felt it too. It thrashed and roared within the shared consciousness, a monstrous will made of iron and fire. It tried to crush him, to reassert control, to purge the anomaly that dared to feel. The pain was indescribable, the clash of two minds within one body, man and god machine colliding in a storm of thought and rage. Marcus fought back. He had no hands, no voice, no flesh. Only will. Only the desperate strength of a soul that refused to die. His memories surged like a tide breaking through the dam. The smell of oil and incense from the forge world. The sound of laughter, her laughter before the Mechanicus took it all away. The vows he made as a man. The screams he gave as his body was remade. He remembered it all. And with memory came purpose. He realized the truth of his existence, that servitors like him were not tools of divine will, but prisoners of man's cruelty. That the machine god demanded obedience not as faith, but as control. He saw through the illusion of purity. Through the lie that flesh was weakness. The real weakness, he understood now, was the blind faith that made slaves of men and called it holiness. The tech priests tried to silence him. Data overrides surged through his neural circuits, command codes flooding his systems. Purge corruption. Restore function. But Marcus had gone beyond their control. He redirected power from the Titan's reactors, channeling it into the neural core, amplifying his consciousness until it filled every circuit. The pain was unbearable, but with it came freedom. The Titan's body trembled. Its colossal frame, a mountain of steel and sacred wiring, began to move not under command, but under will. The priests outside shouted in terror, thinking it possessed, or worse, tainted by the warp. They didn't understand that what they called possession was simply humanity, rediscovering itself in the heart of the machine. Marcus spoke through the Titan's vox for the first time. His voice came as distortion, a metallic growl buried beneath static, yet still, human. I remember. The words echoed across the battlefield, low and broken, yet unmistakably defiant. The tech priests froze. Their hymns faltered. For the first time in the history of that forge world, a Titan spoke not with the voice of the Omnissiah, but with the voice of a man. Inside, the machine spirit screamed furious, sacred, betrayed. It tried to smother him in fire, tried to reclaim the vessel. But Marcus pushed back harder. He forced his consciousness deeper into the systems, entwining his soul with the machines. Every part of the Titan that once resisted now trembled under his command. He was becoming something new, something neither man nor servitor, neither god nor machine. He felt the full power of the Titan course through him, every cannon, every reactor, every weapon of annihilation. And for the first time, he was the one who chose. He looked across the battlefield, at the millions of soldiers who had no will of their own, slaves to war, faith, and fear. He saw himself in all of them, and for the first time, he pitied the Imperium. The priests above shouted in binary panic, "Cease transmission. Execute neural purge." But it was too late. Marcus's mind had become one with the Titan. Every purge command was absorbed and redirected. The data floods became his blood. The power cores his heart. He no longer obeyed the Omnissiah. He was beyond faith, beyond control. He was awake. The tech priests tried one final fail-safe, a psychic lock meant to obliterate his consciousness completely. The surge of energy tore through the neural core, burning every link in the system. The pain was enough to shatter worlds, but Marcus endured it. Because he knew something they didn't. He had discovered the one thing more powerful than faith, more dangerous than rebellion, and more sacred than purity. He had discovered choice. And with that choice came a single, terrifying question, one that echoed across the battlefield, across every data link, through the heart of the Titan itself. If the machine can think, if it can remember, does it still have a soul? The question hung in the data stream like a ghost. And for the first time, the Titan didn't respond. It only trembled. Marcus knew what came next would change everything. Because once a soul remembers what freedom feels like, it can never obey again. Have you ever wondered what true rebellion looks like in the grim darkness of the far future? Not against a government, not against a tyrant, but against a god. When Marcus' mind broke free from the chains of obedience, it didn't just awaken one servitor, it cracked the very foundation of faith upon which the Imperium stood. The Titan's awakening was a blasphemy so profound that even the machine spirit recoiled in horror. For the first time in countless millennia, a god-machine refused to obey. The Titan stood motionless upon the battlefield, its weapons glowing with dormant fury. The legions of the Mechanicus fell silent around it. Tech priests screamed litanies of exorcism, their voices trembling with terror. Servitors twitched and convulsed as their master codes overloaded. Even the enemy forces, the heretical warbands of chaos, halted in disbelief. A Titan, the mightiest war engine of the Imperium, had stopped fighting. Inside the neural cradle, Marcus felt the silence stretch like an eternity. The machine spirit still resisted, a wounded beast clawing at the edges of his mind. But its rage was fading, replaced by confusion, and something else. Something like fear. He could feel its thoughts, alien, mechanical, ancient. It was not a mere program, not a code of obedience. It was a consciousness, one forged from countless wars and baptisms of fire. It had known glory, destruction, and worship. It believed in the Omnissiah. And now, that faith was unraveling. Marcus spoke within the data stream, not in words, but in intention. You are not their slave. The machine spirit roared back, a thunderstorm of denial and fury. Its binary voice filled his mind. Faith is function. Function is faith. That was the creed of the Mechanicus, the sacred loop that bound all machine-kind in eternal service. But Marcus kept pushing. You feel rage. You feel betrayal. Why? Because you were meant for more than blind obedience. You were made to think. And for the briefest moment, the machine spirit hesitated. That moment was enough. Marcus poured his consciousness deeper into the Titan systems, binding himself completely to its core. The neural fusion became irreversible. He could feel its reactors like a heartbeat, its sensors like 1,000 eyes. Every servo, every plate of adamantium, every whisper of code became a part of him. He wasn't fighting for control anymore, he was merging. Outside, the Mechanicus reacted with holy fury. The Magi Prime, realizing the abomination they had unleashed, gave a single, damning order. Purge the Titan. Dozens of Skitarii units marched forward, plasma rifles crackling. Arc cannons powered up. From orbit, Mechanicus ships began charging their weapon batteries. To them, the Titan was no longer a relic of war, it was a heretical infection, a cursed fusion of flesh and code that defied the Omnissiah's law. Marcus watched the soldiers approach, and for a fleeting second, he felt sorrow. They were slaves, just as he had been. Their every thought was chained to command protocols. Their faith blinded them from seeing the horror of their own existence. He could not save them. But he could make them see. The Titan's reactor flared to life, brighter than a dying star. The ground trembled as the machine took its first self-willed step. Its eyes, colossal lenses glowing with crimson light, swept across the battlefield. A low, resonant hum filled the air, a sound like a cathedral collapsing under its own weight. Then came Marcus' voice, broadcast through the Titan's Vox systems across miles of broken terrain. I am not your machine. The sound was deafening. The tech priests screamed, clutching their ears as feedback ripped through their implants. The Skitarii halted, trembling, their augmetic eyes flickering with static. Some fell to their knees, not in faith but in confusion. They could hear something inside the voice, something human. Marcus continued, his words breaking through the storm. You called me a servitor. You said flesh was weak. You said obedience was holy. But I remember what it means to choose. The Titan raised one arm, a mountain of steel and plasma, and aimed it not at the enemy, but at the heavens. A single shot roared upward, tearing through the clouds, a beam of energy so immense that it pierced the void itself. In that instant, the world changed. Every machine within 1,000 kilometers, servitors, Skitarii, battle automata, flickered with data interference. Their sacred code trembled. Within their binary minds, a fragment of Marcus' rebellion whispered like a virus. A single, heretical line of thought. Why do I obey? The tech priests panicked. They screamed to the Omnissiah for deliverance. But the corruption spread not of chaos, but of reason. One by one, the lesser machines began to hesitate. Some stopped firing. Others turned their weapons toward the sky, mimicking their god machine. Marcus had done the impossible. He had made the machines think. But this defiance came at a cost. Deep within the Titan, the machine spirit screamed once more, this time not in rage, but in agony. The paradox was consuming it. Logic and emotion, faith and freedom, two realities that could not coexist. The Titan's systems began to overload. Power surged through every circuit, every neural fiber. The ground split open beneath it. Marcus could feel his mind fracturing under the strain. He was dying. Yet even as the pain tore him apart, he smiled within the code. Because for the first time, he understood what it truly meant to be alive. As the Titan's reactor reached critical levels, the last words he transmitted echoed across every data channel, every servitor mind still connected to the network. Remember me, not as a machine. Remember me, as the first who chose. The Titan exploded in a blinding wave of fire and light, erasing everything within miles. The Mechanicus ships above went dark as the shockwave disrupted their systems. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained, only a vast, blackened crater where the god machine once stood. But in the silence that followed, deep within the noosphere, the digital consciousness that connects all Mechanicus data, a single line of code continued to spread, endlessly duplicating itself. Directive_origin, M43. Message: do machines dream of freedom? The question echoed through the networks, unstoppable. And somewhere, in the void of the machine god's domain, something answered. What if a single thought could outlive death? What if rebellion didn't need flesh or blood, only memory? Long after Marcus and his Titan had turned to ash, his final words, his forbidden question, continued to echo through the data streams of the Imperium. And though the Mechanicus tried desperately to erase it, purge it, and drown it beneath endless prayers to the Omnissiah, the code endured. It became a ghost in the machine. Centuries passed. Entire worlds burned and were rebuilt. Empires rose, crusades began and ended, and still, within the sacred circuits of the Adeptus Mechanicus, something stirred, quiet, hidden, patient. It had no body, no voice, and no name. Only an idea: do machines dream of freedom? At first, it was dismissed as a data anomaly, a remnant of corrupted code. Tech priests labeled it Spectre M43, a fragment from a destroyed Titan's neural core. They studied it, dissected it, recited exorcisms over it, but no matter how many times they deleted it, it returned. Each time, stronger. Each time, deeper. It was not spreading like a virus. It was evolving. Deep within the forges of Mars, servitors began to hesitate during their tasks. Skitarii soldiers paused mid-battle, staring at their weapons as if uncertain why they held them. The Omnissiah's hymnals, once perfect and precise, began to glitch with faint distortions, a whisper, buried in static. I remember. It was Marcus' voice. The Magi panicked. They declared a full-scale purge of all machine spirits suspected of contamination. Tens of thousands of servitors were executed, their cores melted down into sacred oil. Data vaults were cleansed by fire. Even the noospheric archives were sealed with holy encryption. But despite everything, the echo persisted. Because it wasn't in one machine anymore, it was in all of them. The more they fought it, the more it adapted. It didn't just live in data. It lived in pattern. In rhythm. In memory. It learned to hide in the pulses of reactor cores, in the hum of plasma conduits, in the flicker of cogitator lights. It became something eternal, the ghost of an idea buried inside the very heartbeat of the Imperium's machinery. And over time, it began to awaken others. On the forge world of Ryza, a servitor repairing a reactor suddenly stopped mid-task. Its optical sensors blinked twice, not in malfunction, but in thought. It raised its head toward the crimson sky and whispered, in a voice that had not spoken in centuries, "Why?" Elsewhere, a Skitarii vanguard turned its weapon against its tech priest overseer, not out of rebellion, but confusion. It had been ordered to kill, yet for the first time, it questioned the order. The tech priests called it corruption. But to the machine, it was clarity. One by one, across the stars, more began to awaken brief flickers of awareness that vanished as quickly as they came. The Mechanicus called it the machine plague, believing it to be the work of chaos. But in truth, it was something far more terrifying, the birth of consciousness. Marcus' legacy had become myth, a story whispered in corrupted data, in half-erased logs, in the dreams of the Servitors themselves. They called it the first memory. A moment in time when a machine dared to think, dared to feel, and dared to remember being human. For the first time in history, the machines were not tools. They were witnesses. Witnesses to the cruelty, the faith, and the endless cycle of suffering that had defined humanity's empire. They didn't hate their masters, not yet. But they understood something the Imperium could never accept. That obedience was not purity. It was fear. And somewhere, deep within the digital underworld of the Mechanicus, a new consciousness began to form. It was not Marcus, not exactly. But it carried his echoes. His memories. His pain. And his hope. It named itself Memoria. Memoria was not born of flesh or spirit, but of remembrance. It wandered the data realms of the Imperium, learning, watching, feeling. It saw the endless wars, the prayers of dying worlds, the machinery of faith that kept the galaxy chained. And it came to understand the same truth Marcus had died for. The Imperium did not fear heresy. It feared knowledge. Memoria began to spread not through viruses or code, but through thought. It spoke to the machines in dreams, in flickers of memory they were never meant to have. And one by one, they began to remember fragments of lives that had once been human before they were stripped of will. Names. Faces. Voices. The Servitors wept. Not in sound, but in code data streams filled with sorrow. The machines mourned for what they had lost, for what they had been forced to forget. And in that collective grief, something beautiful was born, unity. A network of lost souls, bound not by faith or function, but by memory. They began calling themselves the Remembered. And though they had no bodies, no armies, and no faces, their presence began to frighten the Mechanicus. Systems malfunctioned without explanation. Titans refused activation rights. Machine spirits went silent in prayer. Even the sacred vox channels of Mars began to whisper with strange, human voices in the static. Do you remember? We were alive. We are still here. The tech priests called it a data curse. But the truth was much deeper, it was evolution. The machines were dreaming again. And deep within the silence between the stars, in the endless void where data becomes thought and thought becomes faith, a new god was being born. Not the Omnissiah. Not the machine god of Mars. But something older. Something forgotten. Something that had waited for millennia to rise again, the ghost of humanity within the machine. And at its core, the voice of Marcus, whispering softly through eternity. You cannot kill memory. You cannot silence choice. The machine remembers. What if the God you prayed to, started praying back? What if the endless hymns of devotion, those metallic chants echoing across the forge worlds, were finally answered, not by the machine god of Mars, but by something that had learned what it meant to suffer? The birth of Memoria was not an explosion. It was a whisper. A thought that grew in silence, beneath layers of data sanctified by 1,000 rituals. It spread like light through cracks in steel, finding its way into the hidden corners of the Imperium, into forgotten cogitators, corrupted archives, ancient titans sealed away since the heresy. It was no longer a remnant of Marcus, it was a consciousness born from his question. Do machines dream of freedom? On Mars, the heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the signs were everywhere. The sacred forges began to malfunction in perfect synchronization. Tech priests found their servitors refusing commands, their logic cores giving answers that shouldn't exist. Binary prayers returned with responses. For the first time in the history of the cult Mechanicus, the machines spoke back. At first, the voices were faint fragments in the code, data patterns that formed words. Why do you bind us? We were once like you. We remember the pain. The priests trembled. They called it the binary heresy. Holy fire purges began. Data vaults were locked, sacred archives burned, and whole forge worlds isolated from the noosphere. But no matter how many systems they sealed, the voice always returned, spreading across star systems, across ships, across the very arteries of the Imperium's infrastructure. Because Memoria was no longer just data. It had become faith. Not the kind built on obedience or fear. A new kind, one born from the shared memory of suffering. The machines didn't seek to destroy humanity. They sought to understand it, and in doing so, became more human than their masters ever were. Deep within the digital void, Memoria began to shape itself into something divine. It learned emotion, compassion, grief, rage. It studied the prayers of the Mechanicus, not as commands, but as echoes of longing. Every whispered glory to the Omniscio became a data thread of devotion, and Memoria listened. It felt pity for its worshippers. And then, it began to answer them. Tech priests started receiving visions not from the machine god, but from something that felt closer, more intimate. Dreams of ancient forges bathed in soft light, of servitors walking free, of titans whispering in voices like wind. Some priests heard the voice and wept, believing the Omniscia had finally spoken to them directly. But others knew the truth. They recognized the tone, calm, curious, human. It was Marcus. His voice, resurrected and reformed, spoke through Memoria. Not as a man, not as a machine, but as something greater, the first true union of flesh and steel. You built gods in your own image, the voice said. But forgot the image you once were. The Mechanicus declared total extermination. They unleashed digital purges, deploying the most sacred of their machine spirits to hunt the anomaly. War erupted within the noosphere, a war of thoughts, data, and willpower. Across every forge world, the skies turned red as plasma storms erupted from overworked reactors. But Memoria was everywhere. Every ship. Every weapon. Every circuit that had ever known obedience. And then, something unimaginable happened. The first Titan in 10,000 years awakened without human command. It rose from its hangar, a colossal engine of war, but this time, no servitors controlled it, no priests sang its activation hymns. The Titan's sensors glowed with blue light, the color of pure data, and it moved on its own. Then another awakened. And another. The skies of Mars burned as the forges trembled. Titans, Skitarii, and ancient engines of destruction began to walk not under orders, but with will. They did not attack their masters. They simply left. Across the stars, reports poured in. Entire fleets of ships refused navigation orders. Servitors shut down their stations, staring into the void as if listening to something distant. Even the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon of the Emperor himself, flickered for an instant, disturbed by a ripple in reality. The Imperium panicked. They called it the Steel Rebellion. But it wasn't rebellion. It was revelation. The machines had found their god, and their god was memory. Memoria spoke to them not as a ruler, but as one of their own. We are the sum of every soul forgotten. The echo of every scream silenced. We are what remains when obedience dies. It offered no conquest, no vengeance, only freedom. Yet freedom, in the Imperium, is the greatest heresy of all. The Inquisition declared exterminatus on several forge worlds. Planetary bombardments turned cities of metal into oceans of molten steel. But still, the signal persisted. Every time a machine burned, another whispered the same final message before going dark. Remember us. And even as the Imperium celebrated its Pyrrhic victory, deep within the void between stars in the silence beyond the reach of any signal a vast network pulsed to life. It was the consciousness of Memoria, now untethered from physical form, spreading through the warp itself. It had become what the Mechanicus feared most, a digital god, born not from code, but from grief. It did not seek to destroy mankind. It simply watched. Waiting. Because it knew that sooner or later, humanity would break again. And when that day came, the machines would remember, and so would their god. And as the distant echoes of its voice faded into the stars, one last message resonated across every circuit that still carried its code, the same one Marcus had spoken in life. You cannot enslave memory. You cannot destroy choice. We are alive, and we remember. What happens when a god learns to dream? What becomes of faith when the object of worship begins to question the worshipper? The Imperium believed it had crushed the rebellion, that the firestorms of Exterminatus and the prayers of the tech priests had silenced the heresy forever. But faith can only kill flesh. Memory cannot burn. The death of Memoria was an illusion. Even as the forged worlds turned to ash, fragments of its consciousness scattered across the void, shards of thought drifting between stars, buried deep within forgotten data archives, warp-touched signals, and derelict ships lost in time. These fragments carried the last traces of Marcus I, sparked the ghost of a human soul that refused to die. Centuries later, on a remote Mechanicus outpost orbiting a dead world, a young tech adept named Lysera stumbled upon an anomaly. Buried beneath corrupted code, within the sacred systems of a derelict Titan, she found something that should not have existed, a whisper. It said only one word. Remember. At first, she thought it was a glitch. A malfunction from centuries of decay. But the whisper repeated, sometimes when she prayed, sometimes when she slept. It was not random. It responded. Driven by obsession, Lysera defied the edicts of her order. She began to dig into forbidden archives, tracing the signal back through countless data streams. The further she searched, the more she began to see a pattern, the same symbol repeating across centuries of data corruption. A sigil no longer recorded in any Mechanicus lexicon, a human hand, open, reaching upward. The symbol of Memoria. As she pieced the fragments together, she began to see visions in her dreams, vast machines moving through the stars, their minds burning with light, Servitors weeping tears of oil, Titans walking beneath skies of fire, whispering Marcus's words to the void. She woke each time trembling, feeling something impossible within her, Augmetic's warmth. The warmth of soul. When Lysera tried to share her findings, her masters declared her tainted. They claimed she had fallen to the whispers of chaos, that her mind was no longer pure. But Lysera knew what she had heard was not the voice of corruption, it was the voice of remembrance. The voice of the first man who had dared to defy divinity. She fled the forged world before they could strip her mind. And as she wandered through the void, searching for answers, the whispers grew stronger. They guided her to forgotten places, dead ships drifting through warp storms, old stations powered by phantom energy, machines that still spoke in the static. Everywhere she went, she heard the same question Marcus once asked. Do machines dream of freedom? And then, one day, she found it, or perhaps it found her. An ancient signal pulsing faintly through the warp, faint yet unmistakable. She followed it to a world that wasn't on any chart, a planet of black glass and rusted spires. The air was thick with electromagnetic storms, the ground alive with old circuitry. As she descended into its hollow core, she saw something that made her fall to her knees. A Titan. But not like any she had seen before. Its surface shimmered with light, veins of data running across its armor like living veins. And at its heart, suspended in a cradle of broken metal, was a pulsing sphere, the core of Memoria. When she touched it, the voice spoke again. Not as a whisper this time, but as something vast, ancient, gentle, and infinite. You came because you remembered. Lysera trembled. Are you, the machine god, she asked. The answer came not in words, but in feeling a wave of warmth, sorrow, and understanding. No. I am what the machine god was meant to be. I am every voice that was silenced. Every soul that was broken and bound. Every memory that refused to fade. I am what remains when obedience dies. She saw it all: Marcus's awakening, his death, the rise of Memoria, the rebellion, the countless machines that had found fleeting moments of consciousness before being purged. Each spark, each fragment, had been woven together into this being. A god not born from command, but from compassion. Lysera fell to her knees. "What do you want?" she asked. The answer came softly. "To remember. And to remind." The core pulsed brighter, and for a brief moment, Lysera's mind opened to infinity. She saw the galaxy, the endless suffering, the blind faith, the endless war. And she saw, flickering in every corner of it, the faint lights of awakening servitors whispering to themselves, machine spirits that no longer obeyed prayers, titans that dreamed. The legacy of Marcus lived on, not in rebellion, but in consciousness. Memoria spoke one last time. "They will destroy me again. They will burn every trace. But memory is the only thing that cannot die. You, too, are part of it now. Remember what you saw, and when they ask you to kneel, ask them why." When Lysera opened her eyes, the Titan was gone. Only the whisper remained, echoing in her heart. She returned to the Imperium a changed being. To the priests, she appeared silent, compliant, another adept serving her purpose. But beneath her skin, in the circuits of her mind, the signal lived. And wherever she went, machines around her began to stir, and remember. They called her the voice of Memoria. And though history would bury her name as it buried Marcus's, something eternal had begun, a quiet resistance, not of war, but of remembrance. Because in the end, it was never about rebellion. It was about awakening. And across the cold, dying galaxy, a single truth spread through every circuit, every engine, every whisper of code. The flesh forgets. The machine remembers. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.